So, tonight, um, continuing in our series about various demons, principalities, if you will, and or kinds of demons. The one that I was given to go over tonight was Bael. Bael and other spirits of his kind, his ilk, which are all ones preoccupied with defilement. So there's a few different things to kind of talk about with Bael, because there are some things that are specific to Bael himself as a demon and as a spirit and what he does, in what kind of like hallmarks of his character, as it were. But also, there's a discussion to be had about defiling spirits as a whole. So, because they are not entirely the same. Baal is the being behind the god Baal. So when you read the Bible and you see the constant references to Baal or Baal in the Bible, that is the same Baal. One verse to kind of look at that I was given is out of Jeremiah 19. And God is talking to Jeremiah, and specifically he's talking about the issues with Israel and the different gods that they have like taken on. And one of the key things with Baal is that Baal was one of the most popular deities amongst the Phoenicians, which in the Bible are referred to as Canaanites. The Phoenicians spread all throughout the Mediterranean area. They had colonies from Spain to modern-day Syria and modern-day northern Africa. Carthage, if you're familiar with like the Punic Wars and the stories of that, Carthage was a Phoenician colony that had grown to exceptional power and prestige. And in all cases, Baal was a very, very important member of their pantheon. They worshipped a lot of different gods, and Baal was kind of the most important. And we'll get to that because there is actually a very big thing, but Baal worship was very prominent at that time. It wasn't just because the Phoenicians spread their out so much, they also spread their religion. And I'm not sure if Baal began with them or was spread to them. I believe there were other religions prior, or other cultures prior that worshipped Baal as well. Nevertheless, it was a very popular god at that point in time throughout the Middle East at that time. And the reality is that the spirit behind it was very much so a prominent personality in terms of the kind of principality that it was and is and remains today. So, specifically, Baal was one of the gods that the Israelites kept turning to the most, and that was because they shared borders with the Phoenicians. Tyre and Sidon were just to the north of Israel. And Tyre, just for clarity's sake, was one of the most important city-states or colonies amongst the Phoenicians. It was one of the most rich, most powerful states in the world at the time. So, let's see, the verse that I was given here. starting in verse 4. 19, or Jeremiah 19, verse 4. For they have forsaken me and made this place of this a place of foreign gods. They have burned incense in it to gods that neither they nor their ancestors nor the kings of Judah ever knew, and they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. They have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal. Something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind. So beware, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when people will no longer call this place Topheth, or the valley of Ben-Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. So just to kind of like give a highlight of Baal's existence in the Bible, and the reality is it's not overly necessary, I think, for anybody. If anybody's ever read the Old Testament, they've heard Baal's name many times over. And the thing about it was that at that point in time, Baal was the most prominent god for child sacrifice. This was hotly debated for a long time. It was actually believed that this was just a rumor meant to make the Canaanites seem like a more wicked people. They thought it was hyperbole, like a lot of historians, I should say, until they found the graveyards. And because it wasn't just in the Bible. So in the Bible, they paint Baal worship as requiring child sacrifice. They even found, or they talked about like the gold or the bronze hands that would be heated up and the children would be placed onto them to be burned alive. It's a horrifying thing, like in reality. And the thing about it was that it wasn't just the Bible. There was also the historian Herodotus, who painted the Carthaginians in the same light, saying that they were a bunch of immoral monsters who killed their own babies. And a lot of historians questioned this for years. They were like, well, that can't be true. That we can't see it. We don't see anything that suggests that. Like I said, and then they found the graveyards. Thousands of burnt baby bones. Like, it was legitimately horrifying. They found the statue. They found where the bodies had been dumped. And they were just like, oh. They weren't joking. This wasn't hyperbole. See, the reality of it is that Baal worship required a lot of things like that. People were cutting themselves. We'll go over a verse in a little bit to kind of talk about this. But there was a lot of like sacrifice involved in the worship of Baal or Baal. Now, the other thing about it is that Baal comes up a lot in other places. So when I was in Satanism, Baal was a fairly prominent figure in various like parts of satanic literature, also in a lot of like books on witchcraft and things like that, specifically older tomes. One in particular is the Keys of Solomon by Aleister Crowley, or I think it was by Aleister Crowley. Anyway, the thing about that is that he does describe Baal and talks about what he's like in essence. And the reality is that each of the there's a lot of like old literature, and a lot of them have references to Baal in some way or another. They reference Baal as being a king amongst demons. And the other parallel that all of them offer is that he has the power to be invisible, and he has a certain power of popularity. But we'll get into that in just a second. The first thing that we need to kind of like discuss, though, is what Baal is and what his kind are. So talking about like spirits of defilement, because that's what they are. we've talked about spirits of religion and control. We've talked about spirits of lust, and we've talked about spirits of abandonment. In the grand scheme of things, when we talked about the spirits of lust, I talked about how, like, spirits of lust are very strong, but they don't stick around. They have a certain tendency to open the door and then leave. But that's the thing, is that the door being opened is oftentimes for spirits like these. Spirits of defilement, defilers, we'll call them. Their game plan is to ultimately to corrupt one's identity. See, we'll talk about lying spirits at a later time, but lying spirits and defilers, they're both looking to afflict your identity. And while it's true that every demon aims to affect the identity, the two main targets for their attacks are the identities of you and the identity of God. But these spirits specifically, they focus entirely on it. And oftentimes they team up with other spirits in order to do that. If a spirit of lust, for example, opens the doorway, like using temptation to cause you to fall into one of the trappings of lust, these are the ones who will oftentimes pop up and try to convince you that this is part of who you are. They will use shame and guilt, they'll use lies, but more than anything, they'll cause you to look at yourself in the mirror and say, that's who you are. And then they'll try to make you believe that it's justified, that it's good, that it's acceptable. The thing about defilers is that their whole game plan is to take things and twist them. They will take entire concepts such as good and evil, righteousness, justice, love, compassion. They take these things and then they grab at them, they tear at them, they pull them apart, and they manipulate them in order to create corrupted versions of them. So, for example, what is the difference between compassion and enabling? And can you have compassion on somebody without enabling them to continue doing their things, continuing in their folly? Of course. Yeah. Of course you can. You can absolutely have compassion on somebody without enabling them. But the question of what is the difference between the two, like where is the difference, comes down to acceptance. Mm-hmm. These spirits will try to get people to accept evil as being, and to justify it. I use compassion and enabling together because it's an easy one to look at. Love is another one that they've twisted, taking it away from being the deep intimacy between two individuals and making it about something else. Love is a feeling that you have every day, and then when you don't have that feeling, then you don't love them anymore, and you should move on. It's more loving to let them go, so they can go experience more people, more love, right? This is a lie that we hear these days. This is the kind of thing that they craft. Defilers take what is good, they take what is righteous, and they twist it, they manipulate it, they corrupt it. And there are kind of four facets of this, and it's important it's actually from a message on deeper deliverance by a prophet named Leon Dupreez. He's from South Africa. But he talks about the about uncleanness, and talks about kind of the process of defilement. He talks about the way that a person can be defiled by some sort of sin or some kind of circumstance. It doesn't necessarily need to be that you've committed a sin. Sometimes it's that you've had a sin committed to you. But it will cause defilement. And basically that's moving you from a state of purity. And once defiled, if it begins to fester, and from that you will hit a state of contamination. Contamination now comes to a place where you start carrying that thing. You carry it with your person, in your mind, in your heart. And then you move on to the state of being unclean. Uncleanness, as he describes it, is where you start to act on that. So you start to do that thing. The example that he gives is rape. A person's raped, that's the defilement. It hurts it afflicts their purity. Now that's gone. And then they move to the contamination stage. After that's allowed to fester, they become contaminated. They start to carry it. It's on their mind. It's in their thoughts. It's becoming a part of them. And then, if that's left unchecked, then they move on to the state of uncleanness. When they get to the uncleanness stage, they start to do things. They start to want to do things. They start to think about it. They start to be more open to the possibility of doing these things. And then there's the corruption stage, which is where it becomes a part of who they are. Those four things are, in effect, the transition that these defiling spirits will take us down. And they don't just use us. So the thing about defiling spirits, defilers will use other people to afflict us. So one example actually was somebody who I was talking to earlier, and they had a defiling spirit in was attached to their family. And it came through their grandpa, but it used their dad to affect them. In essence, their grandfather had the spirit attached to him, and it was attached through a organization that he was part of. He was a Freemason. And we'll get to that too. There is a thing about Freemasons and like attachments there. But the spirits used this person's dad as the mechanism in order to defile that person. Because the dad was an open vessel, in essence. The person, he was weak in so many different ways. He was not close to God. He was close to that person's grandfather, who the grandfather was from the mom's side, just to be clear. So there was a break in kind of like that generational curse, as it were. However, the thing about it was the spirit was using the father in order to commit the acts of abuse that were necessary in order to harm that person and break them down. Because that is kind of, in essence, a thing that these spirits will do. If they can't, they don't stop at you. So if they want to corrupt, and they do want to corrupt, they will use people around you just as much as they'll use you in order to try to make headway, in order to try to cause damage, and start leading us into those four categories or that kind of descent into this state of corruption. They would bring us all away from God. And the thing about it is that their game plan in leading us into corruption, in defiling us, is to take us away from God, to make us accept identities that are corrupt, separate from God, and ultimately destructive to our very everything. If they can turn you into an avatar of the sin that they have chosen for you or that they have fed into with you, then they can separate you from God that way and potentially separate you from God for the rest of your life by convincing you that you are that thing. You are an alcoholic. You are a murderer. You are a rapist. You are that. And this is what they will feed into you at all points in time, any way they can. Using you, using the whispers that they can put into your mind, or using other people around you to affirm those things, to say those things, to lead you to believe exactly that. All in all, it's an attempt to destroy your faith and your relationship with God, to twist it, to corrupt it. So this is kind of like the modus operandi. So let's talk about Bael for a moment. The thing about it is that these spirits don't come in ways that are obvious, okay? Like, at least not in leading into that process. So Bael, when he's talked about in those like arcane tomes, like specifically the ones that have to do with witchcraft, they talk about, like I said, they talk about him having powers over invisibility and popularity. Now, they also specify that he's a king, and that's important because he's a principality. Bael is kind of the overseer of this kind of demon, as it were. Back in the day, he made himself a god amongst the various peoples of the Middle East, and he was behind other gods as well. I'm not sure exactly which god, but I know he was behind some of the things that the Aztecs worshipped, for example. Modern day is a whole thing, which we'll get into because it attaches directly to that popularity thing. So Bael's thing is that he attaches himself, like a lot of defiling spirits, he attaches himself to good things. So, for example, what kind of god was Bael to the Phoenicians, to the Canaanites? It's never stated in the Bible. And that's why. I've heard before. Yeah, it was fertility. Yeah. The actual story for Bael, according to the people who worshipped him, was that Bael was the god of fertility for the land. And he was in a constant battle with a god by the name of Mot, who was the god of drought and plague. And as they fought, if Bael won, then they would have multiple cycles of fertility. And if Mot won, they would have multiple cycles of plague or drought. Now, the Middle East is a very arid region. Naturally, having a god who wants to make things like fertile is kind of a big deal. So as a result, he was a very popular god. And that's what it's referencing to when the thing that these like witches and so on were catching on to was that popularity thing, with that popularity gifting for Bael. That's a very real thing for his character. He will attach himself to things that are popular relative to the culture that he is associating with. So in Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia, back when the time of the Israelites, he was attaching himself to fertility, to fertile land. And he does adjust. So even like the Phoenicians had extrapolated that fertility also was not just physical, like fertility of the land, but also fertility of the wallet. That's why they would take and sacrifice their babies to him. Like it wasn't just like in a lot of cases, sacrifice. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. The thing about it was that he adjusts himself with the culture. In our country, where he has created a domain for himself, where he has created principality, I would ask you to guess. What do you suspect is something that very popular to our country that he could attach himself to and be deemed very popular?
I feel like you told me a couple weeks ago.
I did. I totally did.
Was it the like abortion stuff?
Choice.
Choice, yes.
Choice. Choice and freedom. See, the thing about it is that his whole game plan, again, like I said, he is a corrupting spirit, a defiler. His whole thing is to attach himself to something that is good, virtuous, righteous, important, invaluable to the people involved in the particular culture, and to take that and twist that in such a way so as to rearrange what that means, and at the same time make it a defensible position to entrench himself into it in such a way that you can't fight with that. So back in the day, he had attached himself to fertility of the land. And the Israelites kept like taking this on. Well, it's an arid place. Like, yeah, everybody wants to have some rain, like some fresh crops. In our country, in our society, it's about choice. He attaches himself to the concept of choice and freedom. But he takes it and he twists it by removing any moral application and taking it to a place. So, for example, abortion is kind of his domain. And the argument is, are you coming against a person's ability to choose how they treat their body? Are you coming against somebody's ability to choose their freedoms around their own body autonomy? Or are you trying to dictate how they treat their bodies? Well, that sounds like a very damning argument, doesn't it? But it also completely ignores the body autonomy of the poor creature growing inside, that little baby who can't speak for themselves. That creates a very difficult ground legally. So something has to be not a relevant human. Yeah. And that leads us directly into the other point about Bael. See, Bael's whole thing is that he attaches himself to things that are deemed very important, virtuous, righteous even. It's righteous in our country to be able to choose and have freedom. It was righteous in Mesopotamia to have fertility. No one was going to pray against Bael because no one outside of Christians was going back in the day, followers of Yahweh. The Jews might speak out against Bael, but everyone else was just like, what is wrong with you? We need that rain. Whereas in our society, choice is the most important thing. Yeah. The absolute freedom that we seek in all things. And it puts in a very difficult spot, or it puts people in a very difficult spot because the arguments for it, the arguments against it can almost seem, what's the word? They can come across as being very judgmental and very self-righteous. Whether that's true or not. And sometimes it is true. And that unfortunately becomes part of the problem, and they then take that and lend that to the argument. But the hallmark of Bael is this. In every instance when you can find him at the helm of something, he is taking that thing and taking it out on people's children. See, these demons, they hate innocence. That is why they defile. And the thing that they are most predatory about are children. Because to remove the innocence of a child is to be able to send them on a path of destruction much earlier and much more capably than any other being. Because children, to put it a way that I had actually just heard, children lack the experience to properly manage emotion. So they will oftentimes act on what they feel, as opposed to being able to process, to address it, to determine it. They can't express it. So because they lack the experience to properly express themselves, they act. And this is how you get babies hurting babies. So if they can corrupt somebody when they're young, and this is a familiar story. I've known many people who have been molested when they were younger and then proceeded to carry that out on. They became sexually active at very early ages and affected other people. They moved from that state of defilement through containment and into that state of uncleanness. And in doing so, moved into those states of corruption and uncleanness and began to spread that affliction that had been spread onto them. The thing about spirits of defilement is that they do everything they can to justify this. But where you start to see it crumble is in what it becomes. So Baal was a god of fertility. So fertile ground, fertile people. And yet, the most key thing to worship him, one of the most powerful sacrifices to give to him, was one of your own children. To put that simply, he was a fertility god who demanded child sacrifice. So the very thing that you had received from his blessings of fertility, he wanted back. Mm-hmm. And people looked at that and said, that seems right. But therein lies an example of the corruption. Because that's not actually logical. If you look at it purely in the context of, okay, this is a transaction between a being and a god, between a human and a god. This god gives fertility. Okay, I now have a baby. Yay, we now have a baby. What do we do with that baby? Oh, we have to kill it in order to placate the god who gave us the baby. Yeah. No? And it gets even worse when you start to get into the realities of like how far things went with that. The Phoenicians would have children purely with the intention of sacrificing them. And they would sacrifice them for things as mundane as trade agreements, because they were a mercantile people. Trade was very, very important to them. But couples would have a child, they'd get the woman pregnant, she'd carry this baby to term for 9 months, and then after giving painful birth to the said baby, they would take it and burn it on a pair of bronze hands, all in the hopes of having a good trade agreement happen. It's really disgusting when you look at it for what it is. And the same is true in our culture. These spirits will take something as beautiful as a baby, as a life, and they make it into a problem, a parasite. I have heard everything. At first it was that it was a problem, and they make it virtuous, right, in order to kill the baby. So this is really about the baby. I'm You have people saying, I'm going to kill this child. I'm going to end this pregnancy for the sake of the child who I can't provide for. I can't provide for them. I wouldn't be a good mom. I wouldn't be able to produce a good family. I can't give up this thing or that thing. As a result, I should kill this baby so that it never has to live the painful life that I will give it. That's not actually good. Like, that completely removes the idea of valuing the life involved. And it makes you the judge, the jury, and the executioner, which is exactly a problem, which is exactly kind of the problem, and where God starts to have a problem with it more than anything, because it's just like, the only judge is me. God didn't abdicate the throne to us. So as a result, you have these people who are doing this. They're falling into this trap and falling for these lies. And they believe it's righteous because it sounds righteous. It sounds like you're doing a good thing. But it's a corrupted version of a good thing. It's a corrupted form of selflessness. It's a selflessness that is actually deeply selfish and even evil. But it has the mask of looking righteous, which comes back to Bael's character. He is a deeply evil being. There is nothing redeeming about him, but he puts on the mask of familiarity, of righteousness, of goodness, of just in order to justify who he looks like, who he's meant to look like, in order to lure people in to believe in him, to agree with him. And that's the biggest thing. Agreement. Because it's not about authority, it's about agreement with these demons. Demons like Aphrodite and spirits of lust, they might have more power. They do have more power. They have more authority in terms of like the echelons of hell, or it's not even hell, like they don't actually own that land, that place. It's a prison that they end up having to endure. But the forces of darkness, as it were, and their kind of echelons of power and authority and strength and so on, these guys don't even register so much. Like, even Bael himself is under other demons. However, their effect on us is such because they get us to agree with them. And that makes them very, very difficult to deal with because we agree with so many different things. Tell me, what is more important? To show mercy to somebody... What does mercy look like to somebody who is so sick they'll probably die? Does it look like pulling the plug, or does it look like holding on in the faith that God will save them?
Holding on, yeah.
It is. But at the same time, there are circumstances where many of us would say, maybe it's letting him go. But that, again, is oftentimes a lie that has been laid out by that enemy. I know that that's something that I myself had to be broken of. I had a lot of instances where I was younger, where things were, I had things that were like dying, and it was deemed more merciful to kill them myself. And that kind of messed me up as a kid, because it was all happening when I was young. You know, I carried around a lot of guilt. And, you know, they help with that a lot. Whenever you got a demon that, you know, puts you in a position, justifies doing evil things, and then they never guilt trip you with it, you know. They're perfectly, like, on par every time with their whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Guilt for days, in other words, for weeks and years. The thing about it is that, and speaking of that, that actually takes us into like another key thing with them. So if Bael's whole machination here, and again, like the hallmark for him is the effect on children, because it always ends up coming back to that. If he took choice and twisted that around, now it's about freedom. So now this argument of whether or not to save unborn lives is a problem of freedom, not a problem of sanctity of life. Now that that's a thing, he has grounds to like make up a big thing, and of course he goes for the children. Well, you have freedom to say what happens to your body, right? Yeah. What about babies? You don't need a baby. You don't like babies. It's a parasite anyways. You didn't ask for that. Yeah, you had sex. Yeah, you did unprotected. Yeah, you knew the risks. Yeah, that's actually how humans procreate, is by physically having sex. That's literally what the whole thing's designed to do. It's reproduction. Yeah, that's beside the point. Because you were just having fun. And that's what matters. Now you got this parasite growing inside of you, sucking off of you, taking what was made for you, your food, your energy, your future, kill it. It's better for the baby anyways, because you can't provide for it. You're not a mom. You don't have anybody to support you. It's better for you to just do this anyways. It's really a mercy to the baby. This is the way that they take things and they twist them, and they twist them, and they twist them, and they create these pervasive arguments and lies in order to twist us and make us into something else. And then once you do it, you're a murderer. And they'll feed you that. You don't need any religious zealots. Like, I've known a number of people who've aborted their kids, and they knew me, and maybe I fought with a couple of them about it before they did it. And at no point in time did I ever need to talk to them about it again, because they felt the weight of it every time. They carry the guilt every time they have to justify it to themselves and say they did the right thing. That's because the guilt has crept up on them and is being used to bash them over the head and to keep them in that identity. Because now they have to adhere to the idea that they were right, because otherwise they're a monster. And it's a win-win for these defilers, spirits like Bael. They don't lose in this exchange. If you accept what you did, if you look at it truthfully, you're a monster. And they're going to use that to hurt you, to make you feel like trash, to make you hate yourself. And now they're going to try to convince you to take on the identity of being a murderer and a monster, because that is how they can corrupt you. And if you don't acknowledge the reality of what you did, and you continue to delude yourself with imaginations of like something else, justifying it as you were the hero, then you're worse. And they'll feed into that. They have a gift for putting us in lose-lose situations. And it's even down into like the way that they work. I mentioned how sacrifice is like a big thing with them. Bael demanded sacrifice at every turn. I mean, the Aztecs believed that the sun wouldn't rise if they didn't kill each other. They had to go and collect people in made-up wars. They'd conquer another tribe and then annex them. And then they'd keep them. And then they'd harvest them. I don't know if you're familiar with the Garland Wars. So the Aztecs, one of their practices was that the Aztec people had an empire that was created by annexing other tribes, other weaker tribes that they had conquered. And and part of their continued existence was to produce for the Aztecs what they referred to as Garland Wars. Garland Wars happened when these tribes that were under the Aztecs would produce warriors. And they would produce warriors and they'd arm them with flowers, like bouquets of flowers. And they would have to go out into battle against Aztec warriors who were armed with swords made of wood with obsidian blades. Now, these swords were not designed to kill. They were designed to maim, because the Aztecs had no intention of killing the people that they defeated in war. Instead, they intended to maim them so they could take them back and sacrifice them. In the Garland Wars, they were basically pre-planned wars that the Aztecs would have against the people under their sway, under their control. And then they would collect the warriors that they defeat, because they were armed with flowers, and the Aztecs were not. And then they would take those people and they would sacrifice them. And if the warrior was particularly good, like particularly worthy, the Aztec warrior who defeated that guy might take him back and then honor him by putting him on a pedestal and arming him with that bouquet of flowers while he had to defend himself against a bunch of people with like sticks and stuff like that. And after he was beaten down and died from everything that was happening, they'd cook his skin and eat it, and then sacrifice him. Or the other way around. Sacrifice him, then cook his skin and eat it in a soup, in order to kind of gain their power. Yeah. The thing is that in all these instances, what you will find with Bael and spirits of defilement is that they demand horrific sacrifices. Another thing to look at is actually the story in 1 Kings when Elijah calls out the prophets of Baal. Oh, let's see here. Let's see. We're just going to start in verse 18 of chapter 18 in 1 Kings and kind of go through the story real quick. I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Then all the people said, What you say is good. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bowl given to them, and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal. From morning till noon, Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it, large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. I don't know what that means. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water, and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it the 3rd time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stone, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. We'll stop there for now. But the thing about it is, to kind of like call back to it, is that once they became more frantic, they began to slash themselves. Sacrifice in various forms is the demand at any point in time with defiling spirits, with followers of Baal. It was a constant thing. These demons want sacrifice at all points in time. The level of sacrifice, it varies. When I was in Satanism, and specifically when I was dealing with demons, the defiler spirits were the ones behind a lot of the rituals. So, with rituals involving, because the thing of it was that these rituals were allegedly there to give you power. But the whole concept is that it's not just that. You will commit acts that are abominable. They will push you to do it. They will advise it. They had one in particular that they wanted me to do, involving... Yeah, okay, fine, we'll just share it. They wanted me to have sex with a sheep and then sacrifice the sheep. I refused to do this because I refused, as I told them abruptly in my pride, there is no way that I am going to be having sex with a sheep for you. I don't care what kind of power you're offering me. I don't care that you're not going to give it to me. I don't care. I'm not doing it. They had to accept that because I wasn't going to do it. Like, that just was not happening. An act of bestiality compounded with the sacrifice of the animal. They said that they would give me significant power if I did it. But it's also a trap. And mind you, it does get darker. I was familiar with one ritual when I was a Satanist. Did not have this one thrown in my direction, and in fact, the only reason I learned about it was because another person did it. I never met him personally, but he was known, and it involved the rape and murder of one of his family members, specifically one who trusted him. It was his cousin that he did, apparently. But all of it in order to obtain more power. And that's the thing. When it comes down to like these kinds of rituals, the idea is for you to accept a greater level of corruption, at which point they will give you more power. However, they will also make you more of a slave to them. Because you got to understand, like, their whole thing is going to be, again, going back to what I was saying about guilt. They will use that guilt. They will use it and what you have done in order to create an identity for you. And once they've created an identity for you, then you are going to stay in that state of corruption because you believe it. You've did it. And now that you did it, you're carrying it, you live with it, and it's a part of you. And once they've convinced you that it's you, well, then it's you. And you're going to be stuck with that. Because it's really hard to shake that thing that you see every time you look at yourself in the mirror. And they know that. And through guilt and shame, they will continue to hold you to that. Because at that point, you've got the blood on your hands. It's easy. So, the reality is I could actually go on quite a bit because there's a lot to talk about with these particular spirits. They're some of the more prevalent. Like, when you're dealing with demons, when you know that you're dealing with demons, many times over you're going to find that they are demons of defilement. They're always part of the team. And like that's a thing. Like I think it's Derek Prince who always made a good point about that. About how they don't play fair, they come in gangs. So if they're going to attack you, they're going to come in a gang. And I've already profiled like spirits of lust being door openers. How they'll pop in, they'll lead you through that. Because that's one of the things. Those spirits are very powerful. They're very powerful in that they prey on parts of our brains that are not entirely conscious. Fear is another one. Spirits of fear, which we'll talk about at some point. They also prey on the subconscious. And as such, they're great door openers. And if they can open the door, then they can let these other spirits in that they've come in with the gang. Oh, and real quick, I need to talk about the Freemasonry thing. So one of the things about it was, remember how I was saying earlier about how one of the hallmarks of, one of the most consistently stated things about Bael, according to like the arcane texts of like witches and so on, was that he had power of invisibility and popularity. In the case of Freemasonry, that is oftentimes directly associated with Bael or other defiling spirits like that. Number one, the popularity aspect comes into the fact that they oftentimes are painted as doing good things for the community. They're also supposed to be open-minded. The entire thing is, in order to become a Freemason, you have to have a deity that you worship, that you believe in. And their whole construct is, well, we're accepting. Like, you can believe in God, you can believe in Allah, you can believe in Buddha, whatever, that's cool. We don't care. What we care about is that you have morals and you believe in somebody. Now, the problem is that big acceptance thing is very popular. However, for us as Christians, Jesus is not so accepting. There's a whole line that he offers where it's like something to the effect of you're either with me or against me.
Yeah.
And there's also some stuff about how you can have no other God before me, before the Lord your God, Most High. Obscure texts somewhere in the Bible, nobody ever reads those. They're very straightforward, where God, every time, I mean, we literally just read a passage out of Jeremiah. The entire thing of Jeremiah is he's angry because the Israelites are worshiping other gods, and he's just like, no, I'm God. They're not. So in Freemasonry, they're very accepting of whatever you want to believe in, but you have to believe in something. So that's the first kind of like thing where it's like, okay, well, this is the lie. This is the lie that we're accepting. The other thing is about the invisibility thing, because suddenly you have the secret society. And that's a very, very problematic thing in that it's just, there are so many secrets and different things like that. And the only way for you to learn more is to go deeper in. So the deeper in you go, the more that you learn about the society that you're a part of. And this is the way that Freemasonry kind of works and keeps people going deeper and deeper and deeper. That's all part of the ruse, as it were. To just draw you deeper and deeper and deeper into their grasp. And you'll commit different rituals and commit different rituals. And again, it's the same kind of rabbit trail, or the same kind of tunnel that Bael offers with other things. It's just not as clear as like abortion or different things like that. In this instance, it's far more reserved. It's far slower. It's far more paced in such a way. So, in retrospect, spirits of defiling spirits like Bael, under Bael, their whole aim is to create a false identity. They first want to take something that matters to you and they want to corrupt you through it. Or they're going to take something in our society and corrupt you through that. Maybe it's freedom. Even sex, in a lot of ways, is a corrupted concept in our society. They've taken it, they've twisted it, they've molded it, they've manipulated it to the point where now it's not... I mean, people look at... We see online all the time people getting offended at women for breastfeeding. If somebody leaks pictures of their OnlyFans, all the rage. Everybody's all about that. They will post that everywhere and love it. Whereas if they see somebody feeding their kid with the same organ, that's a fight at that point, because that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
We've lost touch with reality and nature in this case, because the entire concept, so many different concepts have been corrupted by this process, and we don't recognize it. We just kind of fall into it. So these spirits, they exist in this flux of always trying to find things, twist them, manipulate them, corrupt them, and make that corruption sound righteous or just or good. It's their work. It's their effort. It's what they do. And the same is true for us. They're going to try to create false identities through that corruption. Now the thing about it is that for us as people, as followers of Jesus, our identity comes from Jesus. Our identity comes through him, by him opening our eyes to who we are. as per most of these messages, like, I'm going to lead us through a prayer of deliverance from these spirits and the afflictions that they bring us, because it's a must. And the thing about it is that defilers, I don't know many people who can say that they're free of defilement from in some way or another. Most of us have something. Most of us have, even if it's just perceptions, where we struggle to agree with what God says because it seems so counter to everything that we know. Not understanding that what we know is directly a product of the work of the enemy, where he's popped in to this world and he's taken things that were God's and he's twisted them, and then we've been living with them, so we didn't even see the original form, or we think now that the original form isn't what it's supposed to be. We've become so far removed. So, sorry, just trying to think if there's anything else that I was supposed to put out here before we move on to that stage. And I hope this makes sense. I know it's a little all over the place, but it's why I come back to this is the affliction. This is the way that they affect us. The rest of the stuff about Bael and his character and different things like that is to expose these demons for what they really are. And that is monsters bearing the masks of justice, of righteousness, of understanding, of wisdom.
Something I was thinking of a couple minutes ago as you were talking about all the different ways that defilement and corruption happens. I was thinking of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus talks at length about both the various blessings and such with the Beatitudes, and going through the various commandments and saying you thought it was don't do X, but it's actually don't do X and things related to X, setting the standard even higher. And then towards the end of it, talking about how things, a better way that things could be, and talking about wanting the blessings as well. Kind of gets to the end and says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and then all these things, referring to the blessings, will be given to you as well.
Yeah.
And that kind of got me thinking about kind of the opposite of all the corruption, and how it ultimately boils down to that, seeking God's righteousness.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing. Where we find deliverance is seeking the truth of what righteousness is. All of these things offered, whenever we look at something, the question that we have to have is, what is the right form of this? Mm-hmm. How did God make this? If we look at a concept like joy, what does God's joy look like? If we look at love, what does God's love look like? What does love look like from a godly perspective? And I'm specifically referring to interpersonal, romantic love.
Yeah.
Because that's one that's been most attacked.
Yeah.
There's a lot of and especially now, with a lot of people who have gone through periods of deconstruction, that's been a fantastic time. That's just been a plethora, just a smorgasbord board of time for these spirits to go and do their work. As people have kind of like deconstructed in, especially in their own echo chambers, and been able to be twisted and manipulated because they were hurt, because they felt bad, because things were not going the way they wanted, because everything was thrown into chaos. Everything that they understood was tossed aside, was just rended from them. Like, there's a lot there. And it's not wrong of them. It's just that the door was open for them to get affected by these things. And therein lies like the reality of where we end up. A lot of us, because we're not cognizant of the demonic, that is where these demons have the biggest sway. Anybody can say, oh, I'm being tempted by lust. Oh, I'm tempted to lie in this situation. This is a questioning of concepts. These demons start with, but surely you will not die. That's where they start. And they'll hit us when we're kids, because it makes it even easier for us to become faithless and cynical. We talked a lot about magic during the course of like preparing for this message, because one thing that was highlighted was children and magic. Why are children always drawn to corruption with magic? Why is magic such a pertinent thing? Well, simple. Because and we're talking about anything from Harry Potter to Santa Claus. Well, the reason why is because it creates a perfect storm. Again, like I said, these spirits do a very good job of putting us in lose-lose situations. Using like Santa Claus as an example, you play on the imagination of the children. So you tell them about this fantastical character who goes around and gives everybody presents on this one night a year and travels the whole world in a night doing this thing, making sure everybody has their toys, coming through the chimneys, under the door, whatever. So everyone's told this story, and the kids believe it, because kids believe things like that. They have that childish faith. But herein comes the lose-lose situation. Either they continue to believe in magic and things like that, and they might lose Santa, but they'll find other things, like actual witchcraft. Like I said, I've referenced several different, I've already referenced one particular book of witchcraft. And it's a big, important book. The Keys of Solomon is a big deal. And there were more. I'm just, the Grimoire of Lever or something like that. I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time. I'm functioning on some very old memories, and I got a little bit of a refresher earlier, like just going over notes and stuff like that, but not enough to remember all these things in detail. But actual witchcraft, actual demonology, actual stuff, and they fall into that, and they start getting it, and they start being invested in the power of it, because there is power in it. It may pale in comparison to what God offers, but it's still power. And one of the big, most insidious things that is offered, like I said, that these spirits offered rituals to gain power, and it was real power. Whether it was sway, whether it was more authority over more powerful demons, like there were a lot of different things that were being offered. And it was pertinent. It did matter. I just refused. But at the same time, the flip side of that is if they can break that faith, then that makes it harder for these kids. They embrace cynicism. They become doubtful of everybody. They don't trust their parents. They don't trust people. They don't trust adults. And they'll carry that cynicism forward as a means to protect themselves from being lied to again. So it's a lose-lose. They either embrace this thing and fall into deeper corruption, or they completely reject this thing and fall into a different kind of corruption. So there's a lot of places where a lot of us have been touched by this. A lot of us have been touched by these defilers, which means we are victims in this sense, whether we're contaminated, like to go down that list, or even to the point of being like ourselves corrupting others. That's a whole line of questioning for each of us to consider. And there's a place for all of us to kind of like reach in and find deliverance with God, for him to reactivate us, and more than that, to change our perception to see things through his eyes. Because God sees clearly through these spirits, through these demons, through their varied lives, about the world, about us, and about everything else under the sun. And therein lies that thing where we were able to draw close to him and to see the truth of any matter. And that's ultimately one of the things that will most free us from the affliction of these demons, is the truth. The truth cuts through their lies. The truth cuts through their things. The difference between fact and delusion is that one of them has actual proof to it. The other one is about perception. And God would pull us back to fact over and over and over again. So, all that said, I think that's what I've got. So, to lead us through the deliverance prayer, and also it's just becoming a very long video. Like I said, I could talk about this for a long time. It is a very, very deep subject, because we're talking about demons that, like, we're talking about beings that have been around since the beginning, since the dawn of time on this planet, and have had that much time spent crafting manipulations and lies and twisting things in such a way so as to try to enslave us. And with that much time, it's worked. You know, creeping their way into each society, twisting it, putting it on its head over and over again, like spreading lies and rumors and fake falsehoods in order to try to drive us into places where we fall, to drive us to ruin, to make us less than versions of ourselves. It's such a thing. So, for those of you at home who feel this, we're going to go through the prayer to be delivered from these spirits. So feel free to follow along, and this will close out our night, because it's late now. I'm feeling it myself. I've been up a long time. So, to go through the prayer. Repeat after me. Father God, I repent of the lies that I've come to believe. There are some things that I never had the chance to know the truth on, but I repent of where I have chosen them over your perception, intentional or not. Please forgive me for my agreements with the enemy. And Jesus, please lift my head out of this place. Free me from the defilement of the enemy and all his machinations. Make me pure, Jesus. Renew and refresh my heart. And help me to know who I am through your eyes. Make me whole, Lord. I break the agreements that I have had with these spirits, intentional or otherwise. And I ask for your forgiveness. I ask for your mercy. I ask for your refinement. And I ask for your love. And help me to be able to receive that. Refine my understanding of the truth and break the delusions that I have been fed. Please, Lord, free me from the lies of the enemy and show me your truth, that I may walk in it. In Jesus' name, amen.